All right, Carson, last night at the time of recording, you heard me play acoustic guitar again. What do you think? Am I ready to hang up the bass and go only play folk music and only play acoustic guitar now? Can I quit my day job, so to speak? What do you think? What's your assessment from last night's concert?
This is a trick question because you have done that before. You have been a folk musician and you could absolutely do that. So yeah, if you're sick of the bass, go for it. No, the guitar playing was really, really nice. I'm not sure if there's going to be... Well, Brentwood will post the video of the concert, and I suggest everyone go check it out. I don't know, Will, if you want to link to it, but yeah, Will played some great music last night, including a song where he's played acoustic guitar.
Yeah, I actually cut that song, so I might link to that. It'll be unlisted too at this point, because if I ever have the occasion to like use that for a gig or something, then I will. But I already got the video from their stream, so I cut that. So maybe I'll link to that. So you get a pre-recommendation here at the top of the episode.
I will say I admire the guts to play. I would not have the guts to play my second instrument with Madeline Elkins playing her primary instrument, guitar, beside me. That was... gutsy, but no, really, really nice stuff.
I don't know any better. Yeah, no, that was fun. It was a good night. Brentwood Jazz Evensong. Yeah, I used to play with my friend Kieran Lamb. We used to play a folk duo. Never really played much guitar in the band Early Spirit. I did on a couple of tracks on record, but not live. What I remember about guitars live-wise was I just remember our usual gear in tow, in usually one vehicle if we could swing it, or maybe two, but we would have 3 or 4 guitars depending on what you consider a guitar. We would have a 6-string steel string, which was what I was playing and what you'd probably be playing in standard tuning. We'd have a nylon string also in standard tuning. This is all for the singer songwriter guitarist in the band. Then you would have a guitar in dadgad tuning, and or an electric guitar, depending on what kind of gig this was. And then, so you'd have like 3 out of 4 of that mix of things. And then you'd also have a bouzouki, which is kind of like a lute-like picked 4-string instrument. Yeah, I don't know if you know about a bouzouki very much. I didn't.
I don't know if I could picture a bouzouki. Yeah, that's great. And Jay played the bouzouki? Okay, we all did. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, that's just Jay. That's just him.
That's all for Jay. That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Power to the folkies. I love to hear it.
What other pre-show fodder do I have today? I probably have advertising beef, but I don't know if it rises to the level of of mentioning again.
Hit me. Advertising beef, like meta advertising beef, or people asking to advertise with you?
No, actually, something different. It's there's people I want to advertise with. And I wish they would take me up on it a little bit more. And I feel like there are other people out there who have sold advertising who are giving it a bad name. I think I addressed this once randomly in a 10 Things Subscriber Friday at one point, somewhere buried down in there. But, some of these promotional partnerships things where they're trying to get you to do it for free.
Right.
Some of those players in that space who do a lot of those kind of partnerships, they also try to sell sponsored posts and things like that.
Yeah.
And they don't charge very much money. I'm trying to anonymize both sides here. Like, I'm trying not to out the presenters nor the pages, either side of the transaction necessarily that I'm witnessing here. But I see the selling of sponsored posts happening, and even though it's being done at very low prices, like to the point where I can evaluate it and be like, well, this is probably just worth it as a another bullet to try. Even if it could just be a total flop, but then it does end up often being a total flop, and so the presenter's disappointed even with that, even with the low amount of spend they did on that, and so then they don't want to roll with me. It's like, oh well, whatever, maybe some point.
Very interesting to get the inside scoop on that. There's probably a whole episode's worth or more on marketing generally, because I have thoughts. Obviously, I see a much different side of it working for like tech companies, but it's an interesting world, and I think it's still up for debate, like what actually works.
Yeah, I think there's multiple angles of it that would be fun to talk about. There's another one that I'd be interested in exploring, which is I just think that so much of people's organic posting is just like tactically useless It's really just people doing stuff because they think that's how it's supposed to be done, or they're really doing it just to placate, like say you're a presenter, just to placate the artist. Like they're only posting just to make the artist feel good that they posted something, than to have the artist to share. But it's the kind of thing that everybody will scroll past these days, and it's never going to move the needle. So like really it's just it, in my opinion, being done to placate the artist. And so you might as well you'd ideally just not have to waste your time on it. I think that's a whole other conversation there.
You just put it on your close friend story, but you set the close friend story to one artist at a time, and so it's just themselves looking in the pond, seeing their reflection.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So we got a grab bag today. Do you want to start with the studio artist local feature thing?
Yeah, sure. That's Georgia Straight article.
Yeah, I pulled this for the Georgia Straight. There's interviews with multiple studio owners and operators from the Vancouver music scene. So it's a good piece of local music content. I always love to see it, even if it's from somebody who isn't me. That doesn't matter to me at all. I just want to consume it. I just want to see more of it in the world. And I know some of these people. You got Tom Dobrzanski, who's the founder of Monarch Studios. You've got Jesse Gander, who's founder of Rain City Recorders, where I've personally never made any music, but I'm aware of it as a place. And then you got Jason Corbett, who has his own studio, and he's best known for the band Actors and for his work in post-punk music. So you got a good variety. It's obviously not all the studio owners who are even in our orbit here, not all the engineers who we would think of or who we've worked with, but that's 3 of the good ones. So it was cool to see them all pop up in this article.
Yeah, I've only skimmed the article. What's kind of the angle from the Georgia Straight?
So here's where I want to start with this. There's a lot of people who kind of draw a 20 or a 21 in blackjack or whatever. Or I guess, what's the high? Can you even draw a 21, or can you only get a 20 on your first 2 cards or whatever? I don't even know how this works.
You could hit it because an ace is an 11, isn't it? So I think you can hit 20. You're asking the wrong person.
Well, all I'm trying to say is people who get really lucky, and then when you ask them to reflect on what they did, they're like, oh, I don't know how to explain it, and I don't know how anybody else would do it today. And so I think this applies to anybody who just bought their principal residence in Metro Vancouver in the past 40 years or more.
Yeah.
If you try to ask them a lot of things, they don't know how to examine what happened there. They don't understand their role in it, and they don't understand what it would look like if you looked at it today and looked back on what happened to them. They can talk about, their journey through life, but it's too much of a crazy windfall or luck situation for them to actually kind of examine what happened and to take anything out of it that would inform what somebody would do today. You know what I mean?
I mean, I do, and I certainly prefer that framing when someone goes like, I don't know, I got lucky, to someone making like I think it's called the attribution error, where they assume what their success is because of great decisions they've made, or 100% kind of their entrepreneurial spirit, instead of looking and going like, I got really lucky and right place, right time. I have no idea how to copy this recipe.
And so, of course, this article ends with Tom, who's the one I actually know out of the 3 subjects, I guess, reflecting on how he doesn't know how somebody would start his studio, Monarch, today.
Right.
And there are a couple of factors that worked in his favor when he started it in the early 2010s. One, he was a member of a well-known independent band in the community, the Zolas, and so they would have a network of people who'd be interested in recording at his space. But there's 2 other factors. One is that this is on his residential property. This Monarch Studios is built into a house.
I did not know that was his house.
Article spills that. It's an interesting detail that they included. And also that it wasn't his first rodeo at running a studio. Article also mentions that.
Right.
So those are 2 big things that he had going. 3, if you include the band. He had a network of people from his band.
Yeah.
He had already tried to run a studio before, and he was able to leverage his residence to some extent when he was building out this space. And I actually happened to be in the first band who ever had a jazz date at Monarch. It was my friend Jenny, who was at the time applying for American jazz undergraduate programs.
Yep.
And we booked it out under her and her family, me and a couple other people, to play on some audition tapes for her. And then while we were in there, Dave Sekula actually came in, and it was his first time seeing the space. And he heard us, and he was like, oh, maybe I'll... Of course, now he's on staff. He's whatever you call it, like in residence or on staff, as like one of the engineers who you can book out at Monarch, and who kind of gets access to the space to use for his clients. So, and a lot of jazz has been made at Monarch, including for my client Cellar Music and for other people independently, for myself. Over the ensuing years. So I first stepped in there, I guess it would have been 2013 or something like that, kind of around when he started. But he didn't start it cold. He had already been acting in the space, and this was his next step in his journey of becoming a studio owner.
Very interesting. And that's like a classic, almost like preparation meeting opportunity, where something that looks kind of spontaneous is like, this person has tried this already, and probably learned some things the first go around, and some things lined up where he could like put a studio in his residential home and make that work. I bet you have kind of even more insight into like what has made Monarch a success, because you've recorded there. I've recorded with you there, I think at least once. And I've recorded with other bands there. And I think it seems like, again, I've never had to be the one to book, but like kept the rates reasonable and kept it accessible for a certain tier of artist, while still outputting a great product and having a great studio, like having a great space to make music in.
Yeah, I mean, you recorded there for my first album, and I think back when we did that, I think it was like $500 a day, maybe less.
That's
so it was
crazy.
I mean, that's 10 years ago almost
Sure,
now, but
right,
still,
yeah,
that was a pretty good rate, and it's not hugely more than that now, even though availability is challenged. I think one of Tom's quotes from this article speaks to this. This is a quote from the piece. So this is going to be Tom talking. "It looks different than how I pictured it," Dobrzansky admits. Quote, "I thought those successful household name Canadian artists might go to those huge studios, do some drums, some bass, and then come back here for a month to do overdubs and mix the record. And that happens occasionally, but it's almost like we became the bigger room. People come in to take advantage of the great sounding rooms, the bass, the drums, the big live bed track, and then they go home." So he's speaking to his position in a crossroads of the technology and how people have been doing these things, because he came up assuming that everybody would go to what he calls those huge studios,
right,
and they book that out, and then he is like the tiny little studio that you can retreat to and finish the rest of your stuff more cheaply. But because everything has moved down market, you could say, when the technology has enabled that, and we're like, down market, not even in terms of quality anymore. Like you can't perceive the difference in quality just from whether you did something in the studio or not. People's skills can override that entirely now, which is amazing, right? But he's almost like, now because I'm a certain age and I've seen both sides of this, I've seen this down market thing happen where now we're actually what I used to think of as huge studios. People stretch to come out here and then they retreat to their own homes. And so he was well positioned for that, even though he didn't think that that's what he was building for.
He thought he was making sort of like a boutique situation. And instead, he's which is, I think, exactly accurate the times I've recorded there, right? It's a band who's like saved up to say like, okay, we're going to get like a day or two. I think when we recorded with you, it was always just like a day. I recorded there with Cole Patnod Band. I think that was a single day or maybe two. And, at the time, I think probably a bit of a stretch for both artists. But, getting to get a really nice product and work with really, really good engineers for a good price, it's no wonder they're doing really well.
Yeah. But then he kind of goes some interesting places. I have two more quotes from just him that I wanted to bring out. The other two guys, I don't know, because I don't know them as well. Maybe the interest level isn't as high for them as it is for Tom when it pertains to this article. But here's another quote of him in this piece that I'll throw your way and see what you think of this. So this is from later on in the piece. Quote, it's interesting because I feel like there's a scene of young musicians in Vancouver that I'm not involved with, says Dobrzhansky. That's a group that hasn't found their way into the bigger studios as much. And I actually think he's now talking about himself. Like he's made that
Right. Yeah.
change, maybe. And he says, sometimes I check in with our younger assistants and ask them, do these bands think we're dumb? Are they saying, why would you spend all this money on it? There's a computer plugin for that, and I've got a great version of this in Logic. Are we the dinosaurs now?
Huh. Yeah, and then he goes on to suggest that like there might be these kind of DIY bands that don't really have the capital to get into his studio, even that $500 a day, or if it's, a little more than that these days, is still probably prohibitive for some bands at early stage of their career. But also that the trade-off, or the alternative of just, bedroom producing is a lot more attractive. You can save that money and buy gear. And it kind of goes to this like, I feel like we always pick up a topic that we say like, okay, that's a whole other episode, but like the gear thing, which is like outboard, nice compressors, beautiful microphones, old, nice, dusty drum kits. Those are all things you might go to a physical studio for. And increasingly, those things can be emulated to such a high degree that the question becomes like, is it really, really worth the extra capital expense, especially if that's going to be a stretch, right? Especially if there's better ways to spend that money on advertising, touring, whatever, because that recording is not going to bring you any money, right? It might bring you some exposure, but especially if it's like a 15% improvement on what you would do at home. And when I say at home, I mean like every musician that age has a friend with a very solid home recording setup. I went to when David Lavoie and I were finishing our last album. David's taken a little while to do it, but we can get some like really nice sounds just in David's. He's got a jam space downstairs and he's got a studio upstairs. And if there was ever like a recording studio on the table, we might just say like, it's probably not worth the incremental gains.
Yeah, because I don't think Tom's even implying that bands don't have the money, which is sure true in a lot of cases, but I guess he's saying that even if they do have the money, are they going to justify block booking his studio ever? Maybe not. Maybe they, even if they have grants, maybe not. Maybe they even have other things that they would rather spend other people's money on when they got it, because the comfort level with DIY recording and the capabilities of it has increased to that extent where the bands can evaluate what they want to do in a different way than he would have been able to pre-Monarch when he was coming up in the bands that he knows. This is another layer of him evaluating his position in the down market technological thing that happened here, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think I have even like a strong, I don't know if anything's right or wrong in that respect, right? I think probably for each group it's different. I've always really liked going to do live studio sessions, and there is kind of something intangible about you wake up in the morning, you're like, this is the day that we're going to record the record or a couple songs, and we're going to bring our best stuff, and we've got this like 12 hours, and you're in a nice space with the nice speakers, and they got the couch and they got the control room. And I would guess that on that, you're getting maybe kind of a nicer result. As to say nothing of like a really, really solid recording engineer, right? Again, many home recording artists are becoming very solid engineers, but I think there is like a pretty big difference for, like the Dave Zakulas of the world are surpass anything I'll ever get doing Ableton mixing in my house.
Yes, especially for live ensemble music, and whether you're in an indie rock band that's more oriented towards that or more toward multi-tracking, which could be a lot easier to DIY, it depends on what kind of music you happen to be out there making, I guess.
Yeah. I also wonder if it matters less to get like solid studio recording in a world where like people listen to this stuff on their phones, on like Bluetooth headphones, and stream it rather than like you're never plugging into a sound system to listen to most of your favorite band's music. Um, and I wonder if that also affects like studio, again, speaking more in this DIY space, right? Like if that really if affects the appeal of going to a studio when you're like, our listeners cannot hear the difference between, you know, the home setup and the studio setup.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would be outed on that. I can't AV stuff all that much with my ears. A lot of the times, depending on what it is. So, I mean, who knows? I guess that's like a mastering question. It'd be interesting to talk to some professional mastering engineer about what he thinks on that subject.
Yeah, I think there is, again, I think really the thing to hang on to for live recording in a studio is that kind of like intangible feeling, and working with an engineer who can like get a good or better result out of you. I mean, wasn't named in this article, but I think you and I have both now recorded at Afterlife in the past with John Ram.
Yep.
And I recorded there. I had a 5-day session with the Cole Patnod Band, who's a singer-songwriter out of Horsefly, BC, with some kind of friends from the jazz scene in the rhythm section. And we went into that session really, I think, well rehearsed. We'd played all the music a lot. We were really familiar with it. And still, working with John took that music to a whole other level in terms of small production decisions, small nudges, gear, just saying like, hey, you're not, there's a couple times where on a certain tune, he would be like, yeah, the snare you're using is not really going to come across the way you want it to. Try this instead. And the end result was like, I mean, miles better than we would have gotten on our own.
Yeah, I had a great experience there as well. One time I've been in there for only one day, and I would happily go back anytime. I think he's a great engineer who adds a lot of value, no doubt about it.
Yeah, but at the same time, again, if I've never been the one paying for the sessions, I've been getting paid to be there. I'm usually there in a hired gun capacity, so to record my own music, I don't know what I would do. If I had the budget, I would try to go to a studio, but it's an interesting evolution.
Yeah, I got one more from Tom quoted in this piece. Here's him again. Fans of the IG Panopticon are going to love this. Quote, for the young bands, I get it, he says. With Lotus Child and the Zolas, it might even be a renaming of the band, but that's a reference to his own bands there.
Yeah.
We could invest a decent amount of money knowing that if we just printed CDs, we could sell 2,000 of them and have $20,000 of income from CD sales. Now, I don't always know the advice to give to people. All I can tell them is the more things you do, videos, contests, the more lottery tickets you're buying. You have to do things.
Aha. Spinning the slot machine. I guess he's right on that. I don't know that, getting into a studio is exactly the thing to do. And I think it's a mistake in general to think of any given thing you're doing for your music as an investment at the moment. As an actual, like, you're going to see financial returns from it. It's an investment into the art. It's an investment into like putting your time and your effort and your spirit into what you're doing. But to think of it as an investment for a future return, I think is leading oneself to disappointment, potentially. Even the thinking of it as buying lottery tickets. You would think if you buy enough lottery tickets, eventually something's got to hit, right? And not necessarily.
Yeah, of course, he's talking about lottery tickets as posts and videos and other things. He's not necessarily saying going to a session with him is the lottery ticket, which is probably fair. But yeah, he's talking about like, well, if you can't afford that and that's becoming more and more the way it is, what's he trying to tell people to do? Well, it's just to like try and gamble on reaching people with each new post that you make. That's basically all he's got. And that's where I end up back at this thing of like, well, what did the millionaire boomers in Vancouver give when they're asked to give advice or whatever? Like, Tom has reached a lot of success in terms of what you can do just in this city's community. And so he's being asked for advice here, and he's trying to say something that's based on the many, many experiences he has today when he's out there seeing, but also realizing how much the conditions have changed, right?
Yeah. Man, this every time we talk about like, oh, what should young musicians do? I do get a little bummed out. But I think like, I mean, he's saying, yeah, making videos, doing contests. Yeah. The lottery tickets analogy is the bummer to me. It's like build community with people.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this out too as a future episode idea, which I can do the research legwork on, and maybe we should find a guest who'd be the right person to talk. We should do an entire episode devoted to the Peak Performance Project.
Yeah.
You did live in Vancouver in that
I did.
time.
It's done now, right? They're not doing Peak Performance anymore.
Oh yeah, long since.
Yeah, man. I feel like I have some artist friends who were kind of peripherally involved with some Peak Performance stuff. So yes, that would be fun to bring up.
To learn about the history of it, look back on a closed era, different conditions, 100%.
Different conditions back when that was like your ticket. I just had to win that, and you'd be like the Vancouver indie band for a couple of years.
The thing to strive for, yeah, with an obvious, financial prize to compete for. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I agree with you from individual artist perspective that you can't expect return on investment from what you spend on doing a recording project. You can only expect intangible returns that will come up in a slightly longer time horizon, not an incredibly long time horizon. Like one example that we talked about when we talked about our career backstories was like, I made my first album. I hired a publicist to do it. That publicist was 2 years post-release. He was involved in getting me a job that has been career changing for me, right? Yeah. In theory, may not have happened if I didn't do that project. Completely not related to the financial picture of the project itself. And there's a variety of other intangible returns that you could get that are more directly tied to being an artist. Like you could get some gig somewhere or at some festival where you meet some people who change your career or something. But you can't model that on how much you're spending. You can just spend what you can and know that you're doing something that may or may not lead to other types of returns. But you're right, that's not the right way to judge it, and it's not going to make sense if you try and judge it that way. The only people who can, by definition, are labels who are constantly putting stuff out and who have like a big catalog to assess. But for an individual artist, by definition, you're not going to be there. So you just spend what you can. And when you DIY it, that's when you decide that you can't, and that's probably the right move.
Totally. And you set yourself up for a much more kind of healthy relationship with the money you're putting into your work and the work you're putting into it, where you chalk it all up as an expense because you love to do what you do, right? Like for David and mine, our last album, we spent money on mixing and getting it mastered properly and got it put out on vinyl, which I believe affected our split, or at least, there's some amount of that goes against our earnings. And those are things I chalked up as like expenses. I saved up to do that. It's on the balance sheet as loss. If I don't keep a literal balance sheet for my music projects, but if I did, it would be just chalked up as a loss. And that's okay. I'm just really happy I did that. And like, it's an investment in that, like I'm investing in myself, a project that I like doing, and it felt great to get it done, and maybe we meet people and get to do some cool stuff. But, to expect a return, and I don't know if there's that many, music hustle grifters saying that people should be like investing in their music careers like that. But I think I've heard a little bit of that you know, that candor from people saying like, oh, you should, invest in yourself, pay for a bunch of music lessons, do all this stuff. And yeah, invest in the loosest sense, but don't invest for expected return.
Yeah, I think about it from the perspective of my band and how we evaluate that decision. And we did still do it in the old way that Tom described, where we did just assume we were going to sell a bunch of CDs, which we did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something we told ourselves when it came time to spend all that money. We were like, okay, this is how we're going to make it back. And we did kind of plan on that, and it worked for us.
Yep.
And it would be a bit more challenging to do that today. No doubt. I still think in general that it could be done the same way today, roughly speaking. It may be naive of me to think that, because even in less than 10 years there, the conditions have changed, as we often talk about. But I mean, I still think it can be planned that way if everybody's really bought in. That's the thing. It's about how, especially if you're in a group, how is everybody viewing it, as a priority? Do you feel like there's that shared commitment at this time to do it? And it's really rare. I'm really thankful that I got to experience it with that group of people, and that it was a moment in like the 4 of our lives where we all actually lined up on that for like several years. Like with every passing year, I appreciate more and more how rare that was. And so if I was going into a project as a solo leader, I kind of have to supply all of that myself. I have to convince myself that yes, now it's time. And that's hard to do. So I don't actually know when I'm going to get around to, because like you and me, technically on the numbers, like both of us could afford to go out and do it now, right?
Sure.
Like it's not literally about whether or not we could afford to spend the money. It's just about convincing ourselves of that.
Yeah.
Is it time? Is this the thing to do? Is it now? And am I in to that extent?
Yeah. Well, speaking of being willing to take a loss, let's talk about André 3000.
Okay.
How's that for a pivot?
That's a pretty good one.
So to briefly intro this, for anyone who is unfamiliar, André 3000, one half of the legendary hip-hop group Outkast, quit rapping at some point in the 2010s, or announced he hadn't rapped in a while and announced he was like done being a rapper. He, after that, kind of went quiet for quite a while, as you might expect when someone announces their retirement. Came back with a ambient, improvised, kind of new age flute album in early 2020s. And this year has come out with a piano record, I think solo piano. It's called Piano Sketches, or 7 Piano Sketches. It's improvised music ostensibly, and so it falls into this, broad category of like capital C creative music, right? I might call it like free jazz, but the broad umbrella of jazz and jazz adjacent stuff, and mixed reactions from the jazz world, mixed reactions from critics. So I'm glad you put this in the pod document to talk about, because I think it's pretty funny, and there's a lot of substance here.
So I first heard it after the piano player Ethan Iverson wrote about it. When did you first hear it? Was it when I mentioned it to you, or had you already?
I haven't heard it. I don't really plan on listening to this. I haven't heard it yet.
Oh, well, let me describe it to you
please.
further then. So the audio quality of the recording is voice memo audio quality.
Oh,
and
okay.
It varies. It was played on a couple of different pianos over time, and he verbally announces like track 1, this is the title, track 2 before each of the titles, and then it cuts to a voice memo quality recording of him playing on the piano. So this is, you will enjoy when you do ultimately get to listen to it.
Wow. Yeah, I've held off because I get this. I listened to the flute album. Actually, it's funny that the flute album did not provoke the same kind of response. But there was a similar amount of discourse about the flute album of like, is he joking? And if he's joking, is it a good joke? And if he's sincere, what should we do about this? The flute album was not well regarded as in terms of like, ambient music, improvised music. It's fine. It sounds like it was better than the piano album. So
Let's do quick actual answers to those two questions for both projects based on what we think. Okay, so for the flute record, was he joking?
he was not joking. No.
I agree that he was not joking. So we don't need to ask the question of if it was a good joke necessarily.
Yeah.
And the funny part about both projects is that they both ended up being lauded by various music publications, which we could talk about in just a second. But to this piano project, knowing that you haven't heard it, but I can answer too based on having heard it. Do you think he is joking with this project?
I don't think he's joking. I think it's sincere, but it would be so like I would to say he's not joking does not put it in the other side of the dichotomy to say he's serious. Because I think to say like, oh, he's not joking, and I would maybe say the same thing about the flute project, which is I think you can not be joking and also not be full-throated serious. Maybe he is full-throated serious by the piano project. That's for him to know.
I think it's impossible to say he's full-throated serious if you listen to it.
Okay.
I don't think anybody could, even though apparently in the liner notes he says he's influenced by McCoy Tyner or something. Like I haven't investigated that. That could be part of the bit too, obviously. But I mean, if I'm going to say, okay, I think that the whole impulse creatively behind the record is the feeling of not wanting to be under the thumb of the industry and to not want to be told what to do and to not want to be told to be quiet and go back to what you're known for and be a good team player or whatever. The impulse to resist that. If that is the impulse behind it creatively, does that count as him joking?
Not necessarily. I think he's always been an oddball, and I think he's clearly comfortable with putting out work that's like, he's a much better rapper than he is a flautist or a pianist or an improviser of any sort. And so he's comfortable releasing stuff that's amateurish, and I'm going to use like unserious kind of in the more general term, like a serious improviser. We can talk about the response from jazz musicians, but like would not regard this as like a serious jazz record or a serious improvised music record, right? And so he can be, put that out, and maybe it's like slightly tongue in cheek because he knows this is like people aren't going to love this, but it's just like a thing he's doing, and he's comfortable putting his name on it and wants to share it with people.
Yeah, and there are two big piano player teardowns of it that I'm aware of. One of them being by Ethan Iverson, which is awesome because it includes a partial transcription of one of the tracks, which I really love.
Okay.
And the legendary free piano player Matthew Shipp, who's still active today, also made a Facebook post tearing him down, which I don't have in front of me, but was quite funny as well. I think it's actually mentioned in Anthony Fantano's video about it, which I did watch and queue up, and Fantano understands it a bit more because he's not coming at it from the jazz musician's perspective, and he's not as mad about it. But of course the jazz musicians are mad about it because you did one of the worst things that you can do to a jazz musician, which is have success commercially and trying to wrong. Say that you're doing what they do.
I was gonna say the ship, we should try to link a screenshot of that or something, because it's just brutal. It's a brutal response. And he's not wrong. Like, I'm going to take everyone's word for it that it's like not a particularly, his piano playing is like not good. It's voice memos. So like the piano sound isn't good. I'm sure the ideas are like kind of amateurish. It reminds me a lot of the response to Whiplash, the movie, where so much of the jazz ecosystem, because we have this really narrow niche is so protective of and frightened that the perception of like what jazz musicians do is going to become tainted by misrepresentation by something more popular, right? Like La La Land, Whiplash, this,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
right? That like there's this kind of vitriolic response to going like, no, 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 that's not what we do. And in fact, be like mad that that's even out there in the world because it's a really bad representation. It's, you know, unserious. It's maybe I'm sure Ship used the word disgrace. He called it nothing several times. He was just like, it's just like meaningless nothing, basically. Which I think there's this like instinct to be overly protective over, you know, improvised music, which is very, interesting. That was my first response intuitively when I was reading Ship's reaction and watching the Fantano video about this. I was like, that's reminds me of how protective jazz musicians can be about this stuff.
So on that note, if you haven't looked at it yet, I want you to pull up the Ethan Iverson piece and scroll to the point where he includes press clippings about this project and just read some of them that you may or may not, because this is another element to it, of course, is that if somebody does an acclaimed sacrilege against your, or acclaimed blasphemy against your thing, if somebody gets acclaimed for blaspheming your thing, this is one of the worst things that you can do to a jazz musician as well, because on one hand they could kind of feel like it's a zero sum, you know, they're stealing possible acclaim from you, but also what you just described if they're worried about how it might affect the overall perception of jazz. So have you found this?
I have. So Rolling Stone calls it a playfully enjoyable exercise in spiritual renewal. And few music icons have consistently pulled magic or unpredictable pivots out of the hat like André 3000.
Which is true.
That's true. That's true. His lightest sleight of hand finds him moving the keys like Bob James. What?
But that's like saying nobody's as unpredictable as Kanye. It's like
right. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like a non-compliment. That's so funny. Soulbone. André isn't too shabby of a piano player, and his influences, McCoy Tyner, Vince Guaraldi, Thelonious Monk, and others are evident. Oh, man.
So there's a comment in the Substack. There's a comment on that Substack post where I think the commenter reveals a bit more context there, where I think they said like, oh, in the press release or whatever, he pitched himself as like being influenced by those artists. It wasn't the writer who like just came up with that at a whole cloth, which would be absurd, right?
Yeah. Man, that is really funny. I guess so. Besides the reaction of like the you know, because I think like the reaction to Whiplash and La La Land and this is kind of silly. Like this doesn't affect what jazz musicians do, right? And like this isn't gonna change whether or not like people take Ethan Iverson seriously, because no one was looking at actual serious jazz this whole time. And so if André 3000 is calling himself an improviser, which it doesn't really seem like he is, it won't matter. It doesn't matter. The other thing I thought about is like, we have talked about in the streaming age that like one of the purported positives is that there's no gatekeepers. Anyone can upload anything, even if it's bad. And if you think that's a good thing, you can't be mad about this, right? Like if you're on the fence of someone's, or on the side of the fence where you're saying like, oh, we should have fewer gatekeepers, then this has to get to exist as well, right? It's kind of like not his fault he's famous if this is what he wants to do and famous for something else. He should be allowed to release bad music. And
like in a past era, somebody would have been able to stop him from doing this.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the trade-off of the streaming age is like, if we think that the accessibility of home recording and, you know, also I don't really think like that André 3000 is like taking opportunities away from other musicians here. Like is it frivolous and wasteful if he's like getting money from a record label for this? Yeah, wasteful for that record label, but like,
No, if anything, he's uniting jazz musicians around the world because he's giving them a chance to do their favorite thing, which is complain about the success of someone who is obviously less talented than them at their instrument.
exactly. That is really funny. Do you have responses to this?
Well, first of all, you definitely should listen to it.
I will.
You will get a kick out of that. I think as a media person, it's very funny to me. Like, I can imagine the process by which he gets those great reviews, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that incentive is pretty well documented, and we wouldn't be breaking any ground by talking about it, where in a world where publications, rightfully or not, have the sense that their traffic is under siege by big tech or by whatever
Yeah.
is going on, and that they are diminishing as businesses versus what they used to be.
Yeah.
In that world, the incentive is to cover something like this in exactly this way, and the incentive is never going to be to get somebody to to have Iverson write the review about it and be like, here is why, like, contextually this is crap in terms of a tradition that I kind of feel is sacred, right? Like, there's no economic incentive as an editor to commission that review.
Yeah.
What you want to do is you want to pump up the famous artist who's putting this out, and you're going to get people complaining about it anyways when you do that. So you're going to get the most,
You're going to get the clicks.
impressions, yeah, exactly, by responding in this way. And conveniently, it also happens to require the least effort. Like, they can kind of write lazily, and like, if he writes, famous jazz piano legends as his influences, to just copy that and publish that word for word or whatever. The incentive is just to kind of lazily and uncritically go about it. That's what's going to happen every time. And so it's not a surprise to me that that's going on there. But yeah, that's one of the most silly parts that I notice about it, because I look at things from that perspective of the media side.
It brings to mind the like poptimism problem of like, maybe like, I guess NPR is actually one of the publications quoted here, but NPR and Pitchfork, who kind of famously occasionally will like praise a pop album that's like, these publications purport to be like doing media criticism, right? And occasionally they will take this bizarrely uncritical view of a really flawed piece of pop music because it's popular, and they want to show that they're in and they get it, and that like things are evolving. But I think there's certainly an element of that at play, which again, incentivized by the economics of these websites. Maybe this is going to get everyone to pause the podcast and unsubscribe and never check it out again. I wonder what it was like when Ornette Coleman put out The Shape of Jazz to Come, or his wackier stuff. Like, how will this is disclaimer, I'm not saying Andre 3000 is going to become an improvising genius visionary, but we wouldn't know if he was going to now, right? Like, history has shown that like the jazz establishment won't be able to recognize the new cool thing, really, right? Like, if something's really boundary pushing, I know that's not this. I know that's not what Andre 3000 is doing here. But maybe in 15 years, if he puts, 2 albums of improvised music out every 15 every year or two, then like he'll get good at this. Maybe not like Iverson good, but like good enough, and maybe push the boundary somehow.
Do we think that it's possible that somebody who's already well known and who would get written about could innovate to that extent, or would we say that that innovation would have to come from somebody who would never get written about anyways? Do you think there is a binary choice there? Is it inevitable that those kind of innovators just won't get written about until it breaks through, and that's why we wouldn't know yet? Or do you think that Well, I guess you did just kind of say that it could come from somebody like that if they kept going down a path for long enough.
Kind of, but only because he's like obstinately not, he's like reacting against any expectation of like what he'll do. Even to the point of like rejecting polish, rejecting learning how to play these instruments properly. Like, you know, I think he's behaving like a new and unknown person, but isn't. He's a very, very, very famous person.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a whole meta force for sure that's like the system sucks, and so anything that throws up middle fingers at the system is good, and so therefore what he's doing is good. I think that's a perspective that a lot of people could have here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think it's funny, you know, like I thought the flute album was like funny. I was kind of glad that he did it. It's not good music, and I'm not going to pretend that it is, and I'm not going to say that I liked it. I didn't. But like, I guess kind of like power to him. And especially if, you know, if it makes a couple jazz guys mad, I don't think it's hurting anyone.
No, I think as enlightened centrists, we have to say that he's not stealing anybody's opportunities by doing this.
Don't include me in enlightened centrists. I resent that. So there you go.
All right.
Andre 3000 successfully defended from the haters.
Totally. Yeah. So that was an amusing story that came about recently. I look forward to when Seven Piano Sketches gets a Grammy nomination.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it will. Didn't the flute album get a Grammy nom?
Oh, that I don't remember. It certainly got lauded a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. People really loved it. If you're listening to this and haven't heard the flute album either, you don't necessarily have to. It's fine. You can just ignore.
But that's the thing, is there's no incentive anymore for anybody for any publication to like put up an article about something and say, oh, you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
That'll never happen. They're either just gonna like lazily celebrate it, or, you know, in very rare cases, depending on who it is, they could actually like tear it down and try and be as extra as possible about it. But there's no incentive to just be like, oh, meh, you know, whatever. That just doesn't get published. It won't accumulate attention versus the other kinds of ways people post and write about it anymore. It just won't.
I pulled it up. It got 2 Grammy noms for Album of the Year and Best Alternative Jazz Album.
Wow. So here's a real situation there. That alternative jazz album, that is a hot category among my clients, and you know, the people that I've said, that's real, that people are really, no doubt, very mad that album took up one of 5 spots that could have gone to any number of people that I know. Yeah, 100%. A lot of people would be very, very mad about that.
I did just read that Nate Mercereau worked on that record, who is a serious jazz guy.
There you go.
It's maybe an unfair comparison. The flute album even seems like there was more effort put into it than the piano record.
Absolutely.
It was like a decently high production value. Again, not good music, not a recommendation, but it was a more serious project than this.
Yeah. So what do you think? Is there anything else that you wanted to catch on the way out the door here?
No, I think we have some things we can save for another grab bag one day. Do you have a recommendation for folks this week?
I do. It's funny because it might be a recommendation that people would be likely to have seen, but I discovered that you haven't yet. So I won't spoil it too much for you, and I will send you the video where I started with it, and it's the Giacomo Tura Instagram guitar scandal. And it starts with a video I'm going to send to you, and then it, in my opinion, it culminates with the Adam Neely video titled "The Ethics of Fake Guitar."
Okay, I do know this. I did not know that there was an instigating video. So send me the original video that started. I have watched the Adam Neely video, and I actually wanted to talk to you about it at some point, which is it's interesting discussion.
Yeah, so you might be missing some of the most wild parts of the story then if you haven't started back a little bit further on that. So yeah, I look forward to
Great.
passing that your way. So that in that sense, it's a good recommendation for today.
Great recommendation. My recommendation for this week is an album called Under Tangled Silence by an electronic artist called, I think it's probably just pronounced Drum from what I read online, but it's spelled DJ Rum. All one word. And it's a really cool, I sent this to you, I think a week or two ago. It's kind of like quite electronic, but with really nice piano parts, really creative playing. There's some really wacky parts, some good sound design. Kind of a wild journey.
Yeah. When I put this on, it wasn't what I was expecting, and in a very good way. Not like Seven Pianos. This is the antidote to Seven Piano Sketches.
Yeah.
1000%. Listen to that, and then listen to this.
Yeah. Okay, great. Can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to wish you a happy birthday because your birthday is going to happen between this episode and when the next one airs, even though I will see you in person between now and then. So everybody can wish Carson a happy birthday here in the month of May. It's the May long weekend. So
thank you.
Hope you have a great time, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you on the weekend and having a little celebration.